Moving into a new home was supposed to be the beginning of a happy life, but a visit from the police changed everything. The police detained a black family, believing them to be criminals, but they didn't expect what they learned next. Can they prove they deserve to live in this upscale neighborhood? A story about fighting prejudice and true resilience. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching us from. Michael and Kira had been waiting for this moment for years. They had worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs, saving every penny, and sacrificing vacations and luxuries, all for this dream. Michael, a dedicated engineer, and Kira, an inspiring school teacher, had grown up in neighborhoods that never offered a glimpse of this kind of opportunity. They saw firsthand how poverty and prejudice shaped the lives of those around them, and they made a pact early on. Their children would not face the same obstacles. They wanted a future where their children could grow up safely with access to good schools in an environment that valued their potential. Michael often recalled his childhood home, a small, cramped apartment where he shared a room with his two siblings. He remembered the peel and paint on the walls, the noise of the street below, and the uncertainty that accompanied every rent increase. Kira's memories were much the same. Her parents struggled to find work, and she often overheard them worrying about how they would put food on the table. These experiences became the driving force behind their determination to create a better life for their family. They wanted a house, a place that was theirs, where their children could grow up without the burdens they had known. After years of perseverance, the day finally came. Michael and Kira stood before their new home, a beautiful two-story house in an upscale neighborhood in Silicon Valley. The house had everything they had dreamed of: spacious rooms, a garden in the back where their children could play, and a quiet street lined with trees. It was the kind of place that symbolized success, the kind of place they had imagined for so long. As they carried boxes inside, they felt a sense of pride that was almost overwhelming. They had done it. They had made their dream a reality. The children ran through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the walls. Michael watched them, smiling, as he set down a box in the living room. Kira stood in the kitchen, imagining family dinners, holidays, and birthdays that would fill this house with warmth and memories. Everything seemed perfect. The neighbors had watched them with a mix of curiosity and reserve as they moved in, but Michael and Kira were too caught up in their excitement to pay much attention. They had expected some initial awkwardness. After all, they were one of the few black families in the neighborhood, but they hoped that, in time, they would be accepted. It was on their second day in the house, as Michael was unpacking some paperwork, that he came across the old deed. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages, when a particular clause caught his eye. His brow furrowed as he read the words again, his heart sinking. The clause stated, in no uncertain terms, that the property was restricted to Caucasians only, except for domestic servants. Michael felt a wave of anger and disbelief wash over him. He called Kira over, and she read the clause, her face growing pale. "I can't believe this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How can this still be here?" Michael shook his head, his jaw clenched. "It's outdated," he said, trying to reassure her, though his own voice was strained. "It's not enforceable anymore. It's just history." But they both knew it was more than that. It was a reminder that, not so long ago, families like theirs were not welcome here. It was a reminder that the very neighborhood they had worked so hard to be a part of was built on a foundation of exclusion. They decided not to discuss it with the children. They didn't want to taint their excitement or make them feel unwelcome in their own home. But that night, as they lay in bed, Michael and Kira talked quietly, their voices heavy with unease. They wondered if this was just a relic of the past, or if it was a sign of deeper, lingering prejudice in the community. The next day, as they were settling in, the doorbell rang. Michael opened the door to find two police officers standing on the porch. Their expressions were stern, their eyes scanning the interior of the house behind Michael. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his voice cautious. "We received a report about a possible break-in," one of the officers said, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Neighbors said they saw some suspicious activity, a black male entering the premises." Michael felt his stomach drop. "This is my house," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We just moved in." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any identification? Proof of ownership?" Kira, hearing the commotion, came to the door, her heart pounding. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting between Michael and the officers. "Ma'am, we need to see some ID," the second officer said, his tone brusque. "We need to verify that you have the right to be here." Michael could feel the anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He turned and walked to the kitchen to get his wallet, his hands shaking. Kira stood in the doorway, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance. The children, sensing that something was wrong, peeked around the corner, their faces filled with confusion. When Michael returned, he handed the officer his ID and the documents for the house. The officer took them, examining them for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he handed them back, his expression unchanged. "Everything seems to check out," he said, though there was no apology in his voice. "We'll be on our way." Michael watched as they walked back to their patrol car, his heart pounding in his ears. He felt humiliated, standing there on his own porch, being treated like a criminal in front of his family. As the police car drove away, Kira put her hand on his arm, her eyes filled with tears. "They think we don't belong here," she said softly. Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "But we do," he said, his voice filled with determination, "and we're not going anywhere." That night, they sat down with the children and tried to explain what had happened without scaring them. They talked about prejudice, about how some people still judged others based on the color of their skin. It was a difficult conversation, one they had hoped they wouldn't have to have so soon after moving in. The children listened, their eyes wide, their innocence chipped away just a little by the harsh reality of the world. As Michael and Kira sat together later that night, they knew this was only the beginning. They had worked too hard to let ignorance and hatred push them out. They were going to fight, not just for their right to live in this neighborhood, but for their children's right to grow up in a place where they were valued and respected. The dream they had worked so hard for was worth defending, and they were ready for whatever came next. The next few days were a blur of emotions for Michael and Kira. The joy of moving into their dream home had been overshadowed by the incident with the police. The feeling of being unwelcome was a heavy weight that neither of them could shake. As they unpacked boxes and tried to settle in, they couldn't help but notice the watchful eyes of their neighbors. It was as if they were under constant surveillance, every move scrutinized and judged. Michael and Kira did their best to ignore it, but the tension was palpable. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Michael spoke up. "We can't just let this slide, Kira. We need to do something about it." He looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "If we stay quiet, it's like we're agreeing with them." Kira nodded, though her heart was heavy with doubt. "I know. But what can we do? It's not just about us, it's about our kids. I don't want them to grow up feeling like they don't belong." She sighed, leaning back against the couch. We have to find a way to make this right. Michael reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. We'll start by bringing it up at the neighborhood association meeting. We'll let them know that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable. We deserve to be here just as much as anyone else. Kira smiled faintly, appreciating his resolve. You're right. We'll do it together. A week later, Michael and Kira attended their first neighborhood association meeting. The meeting was held in a large, well-kept house a few blocks away. As they entered, the room grew quiet, and the eyes of the residents turned toward them. Michael felt the weight of their stares, but he held his head high, determined not to show any sign of intimidation. Kira, standing beside him, squeezed his arm for support. The meeting began with mundane discussions, maintenance issues, upcoming community events, and neighborhood beautification projects. Michael and Kira waited patiently, listening as each topic was addressed. Finally, Michael raised his hand, and the room turned its attention to him. I'd like to bring up something that happened recently. Michael began, his voice steady but firm. My family and I moved into our home just over a week ago, and within days we were confronted by the police. Apparently, one of our neighbors reported us as suspicious. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Michael continued, We understand that people may not know us yet, but we want to make it clear that we are here to be a part of this community. We're not going anywhere, and we deserve to feel safe and welcome in our own home. Kira spoke up, her voice carrying both strength and vulnerability. We moved here for our children, for the opportunities that this neighborhood offers. We want them to grow up in a place where they feel valued, not judged because of the color of their skin. We're asking for your support in making sure that everyone in this community is treated with respect. The room was silent for a moment, and then an older man sitting near the front cleared his throat. I think we can all agree that everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home, he said, his voice measured. But you have to understand, people are just cautious these days. We don't know who's moving in, and we want to keep our neighborhood secure. Michael felt a surge of frustration. Cautious is one thing, he replied, trying to keep his tone calm. But calling the police on a family that's just moved in because they're black? That's not caution, that's prejudice. A few people nodded in agreement, while others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. One woman, sitting in the back, raised her hand. I'm sorry for what happened to you, she said, her voice sincere. I think we should all make an effort to get to know each other better. Maybe we could organize a community event, something to bring everyone together. Kira smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. We'd love that, she said. We want to be part of this community, and we hope that, in time, you'll see us as your neighbors, not as strangers. The meeting ended on a somewhat positive note, but Michael and Kira knew that this was only the beginning. As they walked back to their car, Michael turned to Kira. It's a start, he said, his voice filled with determination. We're not going to change everyone's minds overnight, but at least we're making our voices heard. Kira nodded, her heart swelling with pride for her husband. We'll keep pushing, she said, for our kids, for us. We deserve to be here. The days that followed were a mix of small victories and setbacks. Some neighbors made an effort to be friendly, waving as they passed by, stopping to chat when they saw Michael or Kira outside. Others remained distant, their expressions cold and unwelcoming. Michael and Kira tried to focus on the positives, but the weight of the situation was always there, lurking in the background. One afternoon, as Michael was working in the garden, a man approached him. Michael recognized him as one of the neighbors who had been particularly standoffish at the meeting. The man hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hey," he said, his voice gruff. "I'm, sorry about what happened with the police. That wasn't right." Michael looked up, surprised. He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thank you," he said, his tone genuine. "I appreciate that." The man nodded, glancing around uncomfortably. "I've lived here a long time," he said. "People don't like change, but I guess that's not an excuse." "No, it's not," Michael agreed, "but it means a lot that you're willing to say something." The man nodded again, then turned and walked away, leaving Michael with a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't much, but it was something, a step in the right direction. That evening, Michael and Kira sat down together, talking about the progress they had made. "It's slow," Kira said, her voice thoughtful, "but I think people are starting to see us for who we are, not just what they expect us to be." Michael nodded. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," he said. "We're fighting for everyone who comes after us, for the families who deserve to live here without feeling like they have to prove themselves." Kira smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And we're not going anywhere," she said softly. The struggle was far from over, but Michael and Kira knew that they were ready for whatever came next. They had each other, they had their children, and they had a dream worth fighting for. And no amount of prejudice or ignorance was going to take that away from them. The weeks that followed the neighborhood association meeting were filled with a whirlwind of emotions and challenges. Michael and Kira knew they had taken an important step, but they also understood that the road ahead would not be easy. The incident with the police and the uncomfortable stares from some neighbors were constant reminders that they were still not fully accepted. However, they refused to let the negativity define their experience. They were determined to make their new home a place where their family could thrive, and they were willing to put in the work to change the narrative. Michael decided to take up gardening as a way to make the front yard more inviting. He spent hours after work planting flowers, trimming hedges, and creating a space that was both beautiful and welcoming. He wanted the neighbors to see that they were invested in the community, that they cared just as much about their surroundings as anyone else. Kira, on the other hand, focused on getting involved with the local school. She volunteered for events, helped organize fundraisers, and made it a point to meet other parents. They wanted to show that they were not just passing through, that they were here to stay, and they were here to contribute. One Saturday morning, as Michael was working in the garden, a group of children from the neighborhood rode by on their bikes. They stopped at the edge of the yard, watching him curiously. Michael looked up and smiled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Hi there," he said, his voice friendly. "You guys like flowers?" The kids exchanged glances, and one of them, a little girl with pigtails, nodded. "Yeah," she said shyly. "They're really pretty." Michael's smile widened. "Thanks. I'm trying to make it look nice. You know, if you want, you can help me plant some flowers. I've got some extra gloves and tools." The children hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached, curiosity getting the better of them. Michael handed out gloves and showed them how to plant the flowers, explaining the different types of plants and how to take care of them. Kira watched from the window, her heart swelling with pride as she saw her husband connecting with the neighborhood kids. It was a small moment, but it was meaningful, an opportunity to build bridges, to show the community who they really were. Later that day, one of the children's mothers came by. She introduced herself as Laura and thanked Michael for taking the time to teach the kids about gardening. They had so much fun, she said, her smile warm. They couldn't stop talking about it. Michael nodded, grateful for the positive interaction. I'm glad they enjoyed it. We're just trying to make this place feel like home. For everyone. Laura hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You know, I was really sorry to hear about what happened with the police. That shouldn't have happened. I want you to know that not everyone here feels that way. Michael appreciated her words, but he also knew that actions spoke louder than apologies. Thank you, he said. We're just trying to move forward and make the best of things. We want to be part of this community, and we hope that, in time, people will see us for who we are. Laura nodded, her expression sincere. I think you're doing a great job. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. As Laura walked away, Michael felt a sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was another small step in the right direction. Every positive interaction, every neighbor who reached out, was a reminder that change was possible, even if it was slow. That evening, Michael and Kira sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, and the sound of children playing echoed from down the street. Kira leaned her head on Michael's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. You know, she said softly, I think we're starting to make a difference. It's not easy, and it's not fast, but I feel like things are changing. Michael wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. It's the small things, he said, the little moments that add up. We're showing them that we belong here, that we're not just going to fade into the background. Kira smiled, her eyes glistening in the fading light. And we're not alone. There are people who see us, who want us here. We just have to keep pushing, keep showing up. The following week, Kira received a call from the school. They were planning a community fair and needed volunteers to help organize it. Without hesitation, Kira agreed to help. She saw it as another opportunity to connect with the community, to show that they were invested in the same things everyone else was. She spent the next few days working closely with other parents, planning activities, setting up booths, and coordinating food vendors. It was exhausting work, but it was also rewarding. The day of the fair arrived, and the school grounds were bustling with activity. There were booths with games, food trucks serving delicious treats, and children running around with smiles on their faces. Kira manned the welcome booth, greeting families as they arrived. She saw familiar faces, some of whom had been at the neighborhood meeting, and she made it a point to greet each of them warmly, hoping to break down the barriers that still existed. Michael arrived later with their children, who immediately ran off to join their friends. He walked over to Kira, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. Looks like you've been busy, he said, glancing around at the bustling fair. Kira laughed, a tired but happy sound. You have no idea, but it's worth it. Look at everyone, laughing, having a good time. This is what it's all about. As the day went on, Michael and Kira noticed that more and more neighbors were approaching them, striking up conversations, asking about their children, or complimenting the fair. It felt like a breakthrough, a sign that maybe they were finally being seen as part of the community. Towards the end of the day, the principal took the stage to thank everyone for coming and to acknowledge the volunteers who had made the event possible. When she mentioned Kira's name, there was a round of applause, and Kira felt her cheeks flush with a mix of pride and humility. She glanced at Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod, his eyes filled with admiration. After the fair, as they were packing up, one of the parents approached Kira. It was the same older man who had spoken at the neighborhood meeting, the one who had talked about being cautious. He seemed different now, less guarded, more open. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You did a great job today. I think a lot of us are starting to see things differently." Kira smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "Thank you. That means a lot to us. We just want to be part of this community, like everyone else." The man nodded, his gaze steady. "I think you are. And I think it's about time we all started acting like it." As Michael and Kira walked back to their car that evening, their children trailing behind them, they felt a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges to face, but they knew they were making progress. They were standing strong, not just for themselves, but for their children, and for every family that would come after them. The dream they had fought so hard for was becoming a reality, not because it was handed to them, but because they refused to give up. And as they drove home, the sun setting behind them, Michael and Kira knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, they would continue to stand strong, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Months passed, and the neighborhood slowly began to change. The cautious glances were replaced with genuine smiles, and the once tense atmosphere gave way to a sense of community. Michael and Kira had become an integral part of the neighborhood. They hosted barbecues, attended block parties, and watched as their children made friends and thrived. Their perseverance had paid off, and they were now surrounded by people who valued them for who they were. One afternoon, as Michael and Kira sat on their porch, watching their children play with the neighborhood kids, they exchanged a look of contentment. They had faced prejudice, ignorance, and fear, but they had stood their ground. They had turned their dream into reality, not just for themselves, but for their children and for future families who would one day call this place home. Kira took Michael's hand, her voice filled with emotion. "We did it," she said softly. Michael nodded, his eyes glistening. "Yes, we did. And we're not just part of this community. We helped make it better." Together, they watched the sun set over their neighborhood, a place that had once seemed so unwelcoming but had now become their true home. They knew there would always be challenges, but they also knew that they had the strength to face them. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories, and click on the bell to be notified of new videos. If you liked it, give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Also, check out our other videos. We're sure you'll love them. Stay tuned, there's more to come.